This week on Brian Ross Investigates, the Apostle, the leader of a church that claims millions of devoted followers around the world, set to go on trial this year on charges of rape and the sex trafficking of young girls from his own congregation.
Parishioners, adult women, turn a blind eye because he's the apostle.
And the apostle's handmaiden, who allegedly helped to recruit the girls, ready now to testify against him.
How would that agree with you?
We'll get the inside word on what she's prepared to reveal about the man who says he is Christ on earth. Plus, COVID confusion. Why can't the top health experts in the Biden administration get their facts straight?
The American Medical Association harshly rebuking the CDC this week, saying the guidelines are confusing and counterproductive and risk spreading the virus even further.
Even a Supreme Court justice seemed to get it wrong.
We have over 100,000 children, which we've never had before, in serious condition, and many on ventilators.
Dr. William Schaffner is here to help us sort it all out. And this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with the choices made by the editors of Mediaite.
Why is it that you think that the vast majority of your allies in the United States Senate are not standing behind you? We did have that statement by Mike Rounds.
Because Mitch McConnell is a loser.
From the studios of the Law&Crime Trial Network in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our friends on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined as always by my colleague Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, we begin tonight with the man called the Apostle, the leader of a worldwide church who some have likened to the late millionaire pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Both had money and power and faced charges of trafficking young girls for their apparently insatiable sexual appetites. Rhonda?
That's right, Brian. In the case of the so-called apostle, Nason Joaquin Garcia, he's pleaded not guilty to a range of charges brought by the California Attorney General and remains the leader of his church, which has not opened its own investigation and is sticking by a man accused of a long list of horrible crimes.
The man whose followers call him the Apostle hasn't been in one of his churches for more than 2.5 years now. Since June of 2019, Nason Joaquin Garcia has been awaiting trial in a Los Angeles County jail, facing 23 counts of rape, sexual abuse, and the trafficking of minors, all allegedly involving young girls from his church.
He is a sexual deviant predator. This man is a predator. Parishioners, adult women, turn a blind eye because he's the apostle. Everything he does and anything you do to him, even though it seems wrong, is going to be forgiven because he is basically God on earth. That's what they preach.
The Apostle's trial is now set to begin in the spring of this year, as his defense team works to undercut the expected testimony of the Jane Does, his alleged victims.
They don't want to talk about the facts of this case. They don't want to talk about the statements from 5 victims about how they were raped by Mr. Garcia. They don't want to talk about how Miss Oaxaca and more relevantly, obviously, Miss Ocampo would bring these girls to him. They don't want to talk about these women, these girls, who have complained to the Attorney General's office about being forced to orally copulate Mr. Garcia. And they don't want to talk about the statements by the victims, Your Honor, that oral cop was forced on them. They don't want to talk about the videos with a young boy and Mr. Garcia in it, having an orgy. The young boy having sex with a member of his own family, Your Honor. They don't want to talk about that because those facts are not good for them.
The Apostles' defense team has been arguing that prosecutors helped the young women concoct a story of their abuse, and the lawyers clashed late last year over efforts to get the phone records of a former prosecutor, Amanda Plisner.
Now they just want to get personal. They knew exactly where Ms. Plisner works now, Your Honor. But they served her at her home. This was them saying, guess what? We know where you live. They did it sneakily and deceitfully.
The Light of the World Church has its international headquarters in Guadalajara, Mexico, where the apostle once was treated as Christ on earth. But now authorities in Mexico have opened their own investigation into the alleged sex crimes, and his lawyers want to know the contacts they may have made with the former California prosecutors.
They're also trying to intimidate Mexican prosecutors. They know full well that those people could be in danger, but they do it anyway.
It got emotional.
This is very personal to me, but that the defense opposition be sealed because it does name Mexican prosecutors, several of them, and that should not be allowed in the public domain. It also slanders Ms. Plisner, and that should not allow it to be in the public domain. Thank you.
Lead defense lawyer Alan Jackson denied any wrongdoing.
We are not seeking to harass anyone, and nothing we did was illegal.
And they have demanded to have the phones and real names of the Jane Does, the alleged young victims.
I think it's important for the court to understand the volume of information we got on the Jane Doe's phones. If you search all of Jane Doe 2's communications, the first time she ever mentions the word rape, ever, in any context that we've been able to find, is when she and another individual are concocting a story to make up a false rape allegation so that she can win her boyfriend's affections back. That is what Ms. Fusco and the AG has suggested. Well, there's nothing to see here. That's not relevant material. Not only is it relevant material, it's gravy.
But in addition to the so-called Jane Does, the prosecution is counting heavily on one of the women who was initially arrested with the apostle as his recruiter, Alonzo Ocampo, who has now cut a deal with the government and will testify against him at trial and then be sentenced later.
October 12th, 2022, Your Honor, and this is pursuant to an agreement that we had with the people.
Does Ocampo that agree with you?
Yes, Your Honor.
And we're joined now by the lawyer for Ms. Ocampo, Fred Thiagaraja. Mr. Thiagaraja, what is your client prepared to say about the apostle?
Yes, Brian, thank you for having me. Ms. Ocampo is prepared to testify about this entire human trafficking ring that the apostle was directed her to recruit young girls for his sexual pleasure.
And she stands by her story, no change of plans?
No, not at all. She's been committed to this course of action. She actually was committed to this course of action, even or contemplating this course of action long before a plea deal was struck, but certainly is committed to this course of action now.
And she faced a serious time behind bars. What sort of a deal has she cut in negotiations that you've had with the prosecutors?
Well, she's pled. She was facing numerous counts of a variety of different types of sexual crimes, similar to what Garcia faces now. However, she ended up pleading guilty to, I believe, 4 felonies, and she will be sentenced on October 12th of this year. And we anticipate that she will be released from custody at that point in time, serving approximately 4 years.
The power of this church is well known. Has she faced any pressure on her or her family not to testify?
Yes, but most of that. So I could kind of break it up. Prior to a plea bargain, she has been visited. In fact, prior to my representation of her, she was visited by a member of the church who didn't make overt threats, but heavily pressured her to sort of stick to the party line. And then in terms of her family, part of this process by which she is going to be testifying against the church has estranged, her family from her. They believe that she is lying, or that she is now sort of doing the devil's work, because her family is still firmly entrenched within the church. Her parents, her siblings, and especially her parents. And so it's indirect pressure, but she's losing, or the connection between her and her parents is being jeopardized by the stance that she's taking in terms of testifying against the apostle. But she is steadfast in her decision to testify despite that sort of indirect pressure, you call it? Yes, and by the way, this indirect pressure, and then she's also aware that the apostle and his family and his organization have threatened people in the past who've gone against them. So she is aware of the power of this so-called church and the apostle, and knows that there can be serious, sometimes dangerous consequences for opposing them. But yes, she's remaining steadfast in her decision to testify against the apostle. All right, Fred Theodoragaja, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Keep us posted on developments. Thank you, Brian. Coming up next, COVID confusion. Dr. William Schaffner standing by to help us sort out fact from fiction. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTube TV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTube TV today, and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTube TV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back. As the Omicron variant of COVID-19 races through the country, the world like wildfire, it's become a time of massive COVID confusion, changing, often contradictory advice about what to do and just how bad it is. Even Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor got her facts wrong during oral arguments over the Biden administration vaccine mandate for companies. So there's no one better to help us sort it all out than Dr. William Schaffner of the Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, an advisor to the CDC, and truly one of the country's leading experts on the disease. Dr. Schaffner, thank you so much for being back here with us. You've seen the criticism from both sides of the aisle, from other scientific experts. What's going on?
Well, it's a time of change, isn't it? And so recommendations are changing. They've not been communicated really very effectively. And actually, we've heard just over the weekend that they may change again, particularly recommendations concerning masking. So I think we ought to keep our seatbelts tight and try to listen very carefully to what the last set of recommendations are. And of course, we're in a circumstance where we have this variant, Omicron, Brian, that's just spreading like wildfire, as you say, across the country. Fortunately, our vaccines are still working in the sense that they're keeping people out of the hospital. Still, the majority of people who are hospitalized for COVID-related illness are my unvaccinated friends and neighbors, I'm afraid. But if you're vaccinated and you've had your booster, you can get infected with Omicron, but you're likely to have a bad cold or something akin to that. You won't have to go into the hospital.
Dr. Schaffner, we've all sort of had to become amateur epidemiologists as we sort out what is happening. Give us a reality check about how serious we should take this, and is it as bad as we thought it might be, or as good as we thought it might be?
Well, even we professional epidemiologists have been humbled by COVID. You know, I've been humbled twice. I thought things were going nicely downhill. We were seeing the beginning of the end, and along came Delta. And when we seemed to be getting ahead of Delta, along came Omicron. But what I will say is, with some luck, if there's not another new variant creeping up on us, if that happens, I would hope that by February, mid-February, Omicron might have run its course throughout the United States, and perhaps we can begin to transition from pandemic phase to endemic phase. In other words, struggling with COVID as a problem perhaps akin to influenza going forward.
Dr. Schaffner, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
There's probably no group that's more confused or angry than the parents of school children. Half the schools are open, half the schools are closed, some students on Zoom, masks, tests. What should be the policy going forward, do you think, for putting kids in school?
Well, if I were giving advice, Rhonda, what I would say first, every parent with a school child should be vaccinated. Number two, every adult associated with that school, from custodian, cafeteria workers, teachers, school bus drivers, coaches, everyone should be vaccinated. And then every child, age 5 and older, they're all eligible for vaccine. If all those children and adults were vaccinated, schools would be remarkably safe. And then if you add other layers of protection, such as better ventilation, social distancing, wearing the masks, wow, every school in the country could open up at very, very low risk.
Should they all be open now, Dr. Schaffner?
Well, it depends on what has been done regarding the local planning. And I get the sense that some schools have done a lot of planning, others have done not so much. They're more laissez-faire. I'm more worried about the latter because they could be locations where this virus is transmitted in the school environment. If you've done all those good things, then I think those schools certainly should be open. And we ought to do everything we can to make schools available to our children. We know it's not the best, not just for their learning, but for their socialization. Some children get hot meals at school. We need to have kids in school.
And finally, let me ask you very quickly, are we all going to get it ultimately?
Ultimately, I think this Omicron variant will hit us all, whether lightly on the shoulder if we've been vaccinated and boosted, or more seriously if we're vaccinated, if we're unvaccinated, excuse me. And when that happens, and it could happen, I think, by the end of the month or by mid-February, then things will start turning down. And as I said, we can move from pandemic to endemic planning.
Dr. William Schaffner, as always, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Always a pleasure.
Coming up next, this week's winners and losers in the media. See what you say about the choices made by the editors of Mediaite. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by Aidan McLaughlin, who's the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law and Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams Media Group. And Aidan, we begin with your chosen winner, NPR reporter Steve Inskeep, who after years of trying got Donald Trump on the phone, only to have him hang up when Inskeep pressed the former president on his false claims of a rigged election.
If I can just move on to ask, are you telling Republicans in 2022 that they must press your case on the past election in order to get your endorsement? Is that an absolute?
They're going to do whatever they want to do. Whatever they have to do, they're going to do. And the only way it's not going to happen again is you have to solve the problem of the presidential rigged election of 2020.
Mr. President, if I'm... Wait, one more question. I want to ask about a court hearing yesterday on January 6th. Judge Amit Mehta, he's gone. Okay.
Yep, dial tone. Well, there you have it. Steve Inskeep gave it a good try.
That's right. So that's the co-host of NPR's Morning Edition. He said that he has tried for 6 years to get an interview with Donald Trump, and the former president finally agreed to one this week. It lasted just 9 minutes, according to NPR, and released this morning. They released the full audio of it. I think the short length of the interview is a testament to Steve's great skills as an interrogator. He talked to Trump about the COVID pandemic. You saw in that clip there what caused Trump to hang up the phone was the stolen election claims, which Inskeep actually really pressed him on and didn't let him move on from them. He had a series of fact checks of claims that Trump put forward. And it was a pretty brilliant interview, and honestly, the way that any journalist should treat a conversation with Trump. I think if you're not getting Trump to hang up on you because you relentlessly grill him on his stolen election claims from the last election, you're not really doing your job. So kudos to Steve Inskeep there for getting a 9-minute interview after 6 years, but I think it was a worth it one.
Absolutely. Fewer kudos for ABC and Good Morning America for the editing of an interview with the head of the CDC. Let's take a look at what was broadcast.
I want to ask you about those encouraging headlines that we're talking about this morning, this new study showing just how well vaccines are working to prevent severe illness. Given that, is it time to start rethinking how we're living with this virus, that it's potentially here to stay?
The overwhelming number of deaths, over 75%, occurred in people who had at least 4 comorbidities. So really, these are people who were unwell to begin with.
So she went on to say 75% of those who died had comorbidity, but that really took her out of context, didn't it?
Right. Rochelle Walensky, the CDC director, said that 75% of COVID cases, of the deaths that we've seen from COVID, involved 4 or more comorbidities. So it meant that they were seriously ill. Now, many on the right took that to mean that the official COVID death toll that we have in America is seriously inflated. Of course, what Rochelle Walensky actually said was that in a particular trial and study of COVID deaths among the vaccinated, 75% were seriously ill. So she was making a point that the vaccines are actually working incredibly well, not that the total COVID deaths that we've seen in America are inflated by 75%.
So a terrible job of editing.
ABC, really bad job of editing, and ABC News has been caught doing this before, where they've edited something to make it shorter and have ended up removing necessary context from an interview. So they've run into this problem before, and they certainly got a lot of criticism for it this week.
They absolutely did, and they deserve to be called a loser for that. Aidan McLaughlin, thank you so much for being with us, and that is our program for tonight. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to our team here at Law&Crime as we begin the 3rd year of our program, Brian Ross Investigates. We'll see you again next week.